Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Translation Studies and Training, SOTST, Master's Degree Programs. Master of Arts, Translation Studies, Maths, English. First year. MTT 015 Translation and Literature. Block-1 Interrelationship between Translation and Literature. Unit-1 Literary Translation and Introduction. 1.0 Objectives. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand literary translation, the interrelationship between creative literature and translation, problems of translation of literary genres, translation of literary analogies. 1.1 Introduction. Literary translation is an important criterion of translating creative writing and assessment of the vision of the translator. It is an important and specific kind of act relating to practical translation. In the translation of literature, along with linguistic meaning, its expressions and relationship between translation and literature are also reflected. This is why literary translators are expected to unite with the essence of the original text and try to bring its sensibility in the translation with the feeling that the author intended in the original work. This work can be accomplished only in the translation of a translator who himself is familiar with the work of that particular discipline and the cultural influences of the language. In this unit, while going through the basic processes of translation of literature, we will see its different levels as well. Along with the problems of translation of various genres of literature, we will also try to see how literary translation is also a cultural transformation. 1 point to nature of literary translation. When we move forward in order to understand the nature of literary translation, we find that the first step in its multilayeredness is to read the original text. Under this, the original text has to be read carefully for translation. It is a big test of translation of literature that, along with the linguistic meaning levels of the original text, its feelings, thoughts, and sensibility configured in it should be present with the same intensity. For this, it is necessary that the translator of literature should either have sufficient knowledge of that particular genre, i.e., be an author, or before translation he should have tried to understand that work in its totality as possible. In the translation of literature, after the text reading, comes the second stage of original text analysis. It has many dimensions, many steps of sentence translation, subsentence, and word-by-word translation come under this process. The next step in translation of literature is that of translation into the target language. This is the process in which the translator has to see that the structural form of the original text should not be damaged while protecting the essence of the original text. That is to say, the translator needs to keep the total sensory effects of the original text in the target language while identifying the qualities of the entire structure of the original text. Further, this process deals with the substitution of meaning. In this, the translated material from the original text is seen by adjusting it in the target language. Given the importance of matching the fluency of the target language and its internality, the translator may have to change the sentence structure, phrasing, idiom, word association, and even its formation of the original text, if it is to be kept within the structure of the target language. Sometimes, in addition to the original text, sentences or words have to be extracted in the target language. The last step in the literary translation is the comparative analysis of the original text with the translated text. The translator tries to test whether the overall meaning of the translation made from the original text has been similar to the original or not. In this sequence, he has to test the contextual status of the original meaning, idea, phonetics, and its impact according to his time and space, and accordingly, if the original text is poetry or drama, then it is also necessary to use verses accordingly. In this whole process, it is to be kept in mind that the translation of the original text is not only a mere translation, it is also a creative act. 1.3 Creativity in translation. It is necessary for the translator to be acquainted with the specific literary genre of the source language in which he has to translate. The translator who translates the poem should not only have a deep understanding of the nuances of the poem but should also have an understanding of its sensibility. Similarly, it can also be said about short stories, drama, novel, essay, etc. Creativity in translation is not possible without living the sensibility of the work through the characters and behaving according to its environment and culture. It is also a matter of challenge for the translator that he has to avoid such contexts which create a deadlock in the reception of his central theme. The translator has to take the mind of the creator and his state at the time of the creation of the original work, which influenced the creator to write that work creation. Until the translator does not try to know and live the creator's time, characteristic conditions and his overall mental understanding according to the environment, creative translation can only be imagined, its existence is doubtful. Knowing the contemporary psyche of the creator and understanding the creation with its entire cultural construction, the translator is able to understand the totality of the creation. After this, the translator naturally starts understanding its linguistic forms along with its sensibility. When words, sentences, euphemisms, dialogues, idioms, and the entire structure of the work are opened in front of the translator along with their contemporary environment, it becomes easy to adapt them to their time and context. There is also a cultural variation in translation, so it should be considered as the biggest factor. For example, if one is to translate Latin American literature, then he has to know what is the background of that literature, what is its culture, what is the dimension of the struggle of the characters expressed in the composition, what philosophy of life is formed by the identity of the characters. And with its translation, we can make comparisons with the situations of our place. If this care is taken, then along with the whole creation of the original work, its sensibility will also be conveyed in the translation according to our conditions, and we will be able to get the taste of the work after reading the translation. 1.4 Creative Writing and Translation. For the translation of creative literature, it is also necessary that we try to know its technical aspects. After considering some points related to translation from literature and making it more and more original, here we will consider some of its aspects which were resolved. Without creative literature, translation seems far-fetched. Looking at it from this point of view, we naturally have to imbibe the idioms, proverbs, figures of speech, verses, and the refined linguistic rules in the overall composition. Only by going through this process successfully can we be able to make a translation that can give the flavor of the original. Needless to say that with this translation can be successful in presenting its creativity of the target language. First of all, let us see phrase. It is well known that idiom is the best side of the language. This is an example of the euphemistic power of any language. Idioms are related to the culture of any language and its sociality, so they make sense of their culture, society, and situation in their use. It can also be called meaning of sentence or power statement. It is important to note that idioms convey very efficiently the intended meaning of the poem expressed in the composition. The target language is not able to relate its meaning to the culture of the language, it is unable to translate the power of creation. For example, an English idiom, coming events cast their shadows, cannot be easily translated in other language with the same tone and temperament of meaning. Meaning measured without idioms loses its euphemism. That is why special attention needs to be paid to the translation of idioms in creative literature. It is necessary for this to find synonyms or appropriate synonyms of idioms in the target language. It is also to be noted that according to the text, if there is compulsion to accept dialogues or paragraphs only in their intentions, then work can also be done with the literal meaning of idioms. Yes, but this is only an exception. In most of the translations, especially in order to keep the creativity effectively, it is necessary to translate the main text. It has been said to express the power of idioms, which know the meaning of the Vedas. Its importance has been denoted in English by saying fragment of older wisdom, i.e., formula of ancient scholarship. The conclusion can be said that idiom plays a major role in the translation of creative literature because, in true sense, idioms are most helpful in making it. Cultural transformation. It is very important to understand this. Here we take an English phrase as you sow, so shall you reap. Its synonym and even more expressive is Hindi phrase jaisi karni, वैसी भरनी. It is also clear from this that if the translator has the know-how, even more effective idioms can be discovered from the words of the original text, which are more in line with the country of the target language. Proverbs or sayings. Proverbs are different from idioms. Generally, proverb or saying is meant in a short statement, which briefly narrates a quick practical truth. The definition of proverb in English has been said a proverb is a saying in frequent and widespread use conveying a basic truth of a practical percept. Apart from being the most effective medium of expression of any language, it is also an invaluable heritage of the culture of that language. It is related to the truth of life, it takes birth from the practical experiences of life and goes on from generation to generation. In the Proverbs, coming from the tradition, there is a deep understanding of the reality of the folk tradition. Folklore, customs, religious rituals, and present life behavior of that language society. The prosperity of any language can be judged by its proverbs. There is a proverb, out of the frying pan into the fire, which means got out of nowhere and fell into the fire. But if you search for its synonyms, you will find many. Proverbs like fallen from the sky, stuck in dates, if a jackal escapes, the lion is in front of you, etc. It is generally understood that it is not difficult to convert the sense or to adjust it in the translated work, but it is certainly a very difficult task to translate the style into the target language. For this, by understanding the designs of world symbols and word powers contained in the language of the original work. Content. Understanding the content, subject matter, of the composition in translation and reaching its core is a challenge for the translator. The translator has to try to mold the subject matter of the work according to his country and his language, in which the sense of the work, the thoughts expressed in it and its eventfulness can be expressed with its full intensity. It depends on the translator's inner wisdom and his image, with what distraction it enters into the difference of the work and mixes it with its difference. For example, if Kalidasa's Meghdootam, Valmiki's Ramayana, or Bhasa's Uttara Ramcharitam all are written in Sanskrit, then adjustment of their expressions in Hindi or any other languages in which these are to be translated will be important. Similarly, if Shakespeare's Macbeth is to be translated, then we have to adopt in according to our culture. Otherwise, the translation will be nothing more than a literal worm. For good translation, that is, why the names of the characters, places, etc. of the compositions are also changed, and this experiment has been done by Bhartendu Harishchandra while translating Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice under title Durlabh Bandhu. In this process, creation does not become a translation but a transformation. All the good translations from English to Hindi come in this category. Style of work. It is generally understood that it is not difficult to convert the sense or to adjust it in the translated work, but it is certainly a very difficult task to translate the style into the target language. For this, by understanding the designs of words, symbols, and word powers contained in the language of the original work, due care has to be taken in the translation of the figures of speech used in the writing. Metaphor is easily translated, but phrasing, whose cultural context varies, demands a more imaginative understanding. To make the translator creative, it is most important to pay attention to the ultimate element. This truth does not have any special importance by looking at the translation of rhythm. It is always neglected as well, but if you look carefully, it will be understood that this element is a test of authenticity of any translation. The question arises, what is it after all? Answer is the overall rhythm of the original text, its consistency, its coordination is called the rhythm of the dead work. As an example, any book can be seen in front, such as Kamaini or Godan or Wasteland, Jaishankar Prasad's Kamaini, in its overall construction is configured in the verses, images, SOTST, and this to capture the totality of what one wants to do, and to translate it is to translate the rhythm of Kamaini. Similarly, Premchand's Godan or T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, it is natural that the Karuna Rasa expressed in any work cannot be transformed into Veer Rasa. Understanding the time setting of the work and translating it is the translation of Tai. From word relation to the sound resonating within the entire structure of the work, it is bound in a rhythm, without catching which creative translation is not possible. 1.5 Transcreation and Translator's Vision. To make creativity possible in translation of literature, it is most important to keep in mind that which work we choose for translation. There is no problem if it is considered as the first step of translation, meaning that how creative and effective the translation is going to occur depends on the vision by which we choose a work. How compatible it is with our language, how close we are to that particular genre, how it is related to our country, and how much it is going to enter into our heart. We are calling it vision, which determines our success or failure in translation work. We cannot even expect the translation taken under the pressure and helplessness of the moment to be a confirmation of the original. As long as the translator does not consider translation as a new creative challenge, he will not be able to do such a translation which is creative. In this whole process, only his attitude towards translation can decide whether how effective will he be in his work. with a view to the selection of the work, the overall understanding of the original work, i.e., the source language and the target language, makes him successful in this work, and his translated work can be compared with the original. 1.6 Problems of translating literary genres. A huge difficulty in literary translation is the difference between the different genres. Basically, the nature of all genres is different, so the translator has to deal with the creations of different genres in different ways. For example, a novel cannot be translated in the same way as a story collection. In the same way, there is a qualitative difference between the translation of an essay compilation and a play, and there is a fundamental difference between the translation of criticism and ideological writing. Realizing the difference between these genres with their paradigms of literary translation, if the translator is conscious and engages in the work of translation, there is no difficulty that he cannot succeed in it. We have seen and understood the basic elements of translation of literature. Now we will know briefly the nuances of translation of different genres. One by one. 1.6.1 Translating poetry. The major challenge in the translation of poetry is its reconstruction in translation. If it is not restructured, it can never be successful in leaving its impact. The creativity of translation of poetry lies in the fact that it emerges as a new creation. For this, it must have life, the life of the language into which it is being translated. To translate a poem, the translator must have a deep understanding of the poem as well as a thorough knowledge of the linguistic structure of the original work and the sensibility of its subject matter. It is necessary to have a deep identification with the original sensibility of the image, symbol, figures of speech, verse, rasa, and its entire structural configuration used in the poem. In this work, catching the beauty of the poem is as important as knowing its spirit. This means that the translator should express the poem as a new creation by imbibing it in its entirety. Fitzgerald has rightly said that, "I have come to believe that the translator should mold the original work according to his taste." It is clear that there can only be a sense for sense literal translation of the poem, not a literal translation. Even in this translation, there can be a place for the entire linguistic structure of the poem, in which the sound beauty of the poem is also expressed. Hindi poet Kunwar Narayan has translated some of Malaman's poems in one issue of Pratik magazine. 1.6.2 Translating drama. Translating drama differs from translating poetry at several levels. This is a genre in which only knowledge of the source and language is not sufficient for translation, because the characters may speak many languages and the conditions of their country may be different. After going through the original text of the play, the translator has to undertake the work of translation by living the characters along with his dialogues, direction, etc. according to his circumstances. Drama is not necessarily contemporary, it can be of any era. Translation can be done only by identifying with it one's own situation. There is also a condition of ideal theatrical translation that it should be done under the supervision of a theatre director. Hindi poet Raghuveer Sahai translated Shakespeare's play Macbeth under title Barnum Van under the supervision of famous theatre director B. V. Karath. This is the reason why this translation has become ideal for theatrical translation. 1.6.3 Translating short stories. The translation of the story also demands many precautions from the translator. Along with the Italic requirements of literary translation. Translation of story requires more translation and transformation of idioms and proverbs. Along with it is more beneficial to break dialogues and adapt cultural words to one's own language. The dialogues in the story are many times close to our situations in it. The translator is expected to reconstruct the whole story parallel to the original text and present it in target language. 1.6.4 Translating novels. Translation of novels differs from translating stories as novel is more descriptive. It is necessary to pay attention to the smooth flow of description and logic. The challenge for the translator is to capture the character, the context, and the duality within the novel. Along with this, it is also worth keeping in mind that the categories of novels are different. Historical, psychological, materialist, family-centric, social and political novels are written in different ways. It is a very difficult task to translate its totality with the sensitivity inherent in it while keeping it favorable to its conditions. The translator who understands these nuances can translate the novel successfully. The Hindi translation of Gorky's Mother is a better example of translating novel. 1.6.5 Translating essays. Translating essays is relatively more complex. Along with thought and description, there is also poetic determination, which is very important to catch and adapt to your language. The language of the essay is tight, juicy, and flowing. There is deep culturalness in the words used in it. That's why the translator gets success only after addressing these challenges. 1.6.6 Translating criticism. Critical writing. Criticism is the mode of analysis. Translating criticism or critical writing seems to be easy, but it is a difficult task. The translator has to first understand the subject expressed in the criticism in its totality for its translation. Thereafter, he has to assimilate critical paradigms and terminologies. The biggest feature of translation of criticism is that it is a discipline of thought, so in its translation it is not seen whether the translation is similar to the original or not. It has to be seen whether the thoughts and analysis expressed in the criticism can be improved in the translation of the original text or not. 1.7 Literary translations and adaptations. There is a substantial difference between translation and adaptation of literature. There is more allowance for exemption in translation than in translation. The general rules and techniques of translation do not apply to adaptation. In adaptation, the main emphasis is on the feeling of the work, so even the names of the characters can be changed. The context of place and circumstances also changes in the form of genres, such as the transformation of a story into a poem or a novel into a play. Naming adaptation as translation seems to be risky because it behaves like an independent system in itself and remains separate from the rules of translation. Due to being more comfortable and accessible than translation, its popularity has increased a lot. Radio theatrical adaptation of story or novel, and similarly the trend of theatrical adaptation of other genres in cinema and TV has increased. The rules of translation do not apply to this, so it is not even tested under the success-failure of translation. 1.8 Translation of literary analogies. Analogy is very important in translation of literature. It should always be kept in mind that analogy is the basic element of literary translation. If it is not there, then translation is not possible in any way. The names of things and their properties may be represented differently in each language. but they are the same in their basic nature. In such a situation, the translator has to find suitable analogies and translate similar words. If analogy is not possible, then it is better to translate them literally, leaving the strange analogy. Analogy doubles the effect of literary translation, so it is necessary for the translator to take special care of its consistency. 1.9 Translation as a cultural adaptation. In true sense, translation is a cultural transformation. It is the movement of one linguistic culture to another linguistic culture. Through translation, the work of one language reaches into another language. In this process, that work with all its culturality gets bridged in the culture of the target language and leaves its deep impression in it. The feelings expressed in the work, the struggle of the characters, the thoughts expressed, and the human questions many times act as lifelines for the target language. In India, the stories of African storyteller Vinaya Oi, Russian storyteller Chekhov, and Latin American storyteller Bose along with Gorky have made a lot of impact, and the Hindi readers have received inspirations of life and struggle from them. Similarly, Gita, Mahabharata, and Ramayana of India have greatly influenced the Western society. This process is of cultural communication which is made possible by good literary translation. Through translation, the linguistic societies interact culturally with each other, understand each other. Translation is the most successful medium to connect at the level of humanity's experience. If the translator ignores this biggest role of translation, then his translation will be considered as deviating from his original work. The reason for this is clear: we translate the literary work to understand the culture of that linguistic society and the aspirations of the people there, to see their thinking and imagination, struggle and dream. If it is ignored, then how will the responsibility of translation be fulfilled? 1.10 Summary. In this unit, we have studied the various processes involved in translation of literature. We learned through this unit that the creativity of translation lies in the expression in the target language of the emotion or feeling contained in the work along with its overall linguistic arrangements. We have seen that the translation of literature is very expressive in its form. Without getting the elemental knowledge, we cannot do creative translation. After reading and assimilating the work, it has to go through translation. While translating this, the translator keeps in mind that it can protect the linguistic identity of the original text. After this, he does substitution. He corresponds internally and checks its authenticity. Comparative examination is the last step of translation, in which both have to be compared to understand their merits and demerits. In this whole process, it is essential that the translator understands the mind of the original author, assimilates the work and tries to see it in the target language according to his own conditions. In this unit, we also looked at the subtleties of idioms, proverbs in translation as well as the subject matter of the composition, the style of the work, and the overall rhythm of the work. Without knowing them, literary translation is not possible. We also considered the problems of translation of literary genres. Finally, we looked at how literary translation is a cultural transformation. We can make translation creative only by considering it as a cultural work. Because if literary translation deviates from its original resolution, it will neither remain creative nor readable. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we